Alright, what up? Got my 05 Outback here, and trimming the rear fenders, the metal inner liner, so you can fit more wheel and tire. You want to pull the fender flare off first. It just unclips, and then there's a clip here, but you just pull the piece up and pops off. Alright, got the flare off, jacked up the wheel. It helps to have a wheel and tire you're trying to fit or close to the spec you want to do, so you can see how much you need to cut. And you can see the wheel sits further to the front, so you don't need to cut too much around the bumper mount, which is nice unless you're trying to go super low or stupid. So I cut the other side about here and around, and I kept this mounting tab for the flare on and cut next to it, and I'll mark that out and show you. Alright, this is what I got marked out. I'm not going super low, so I don't need to cut too much out, but I went above the little bend body line here. Alright, got it cut. I'm gonna point out, you can cut through both the inner and outer fender at the edge here, because you can see they're together, but where the two metal pieces aren't together, you don't want to cut too deep. You don't want to cut the inner one because you need extra of that to bend up and weld. So that's about where the part's on that side and on this side. And then next, what I'll do, I bent the outer layer out of the way, and then I can just cut it right here and get this piece off. Got it cut, got it prepped for welding. I just angle grinded this lip to get through the paint. Don't get too crazy with it because you don't want this to get too thin, otherwise you're gonna burn through when welding even more so. The bottom, the primer's pretty thin, so I just use some 80 grit to sand through that. You can kind of see where this is gonna meet up with this and sand in there. And then yeah, I trimmed this a bit more on the corners, but pretty chill. This edge doesn't really matter because it'll get trimmed once we weld it to here. And then I used the grinder disc to make this a nice smooth radius all the way around, which will make it easier to hammer the piece up there. Alright, after that, I got it pretty good. It's pretty close here. Over here, not yet, but I'll start tacking from this side and slowly work my way over and keep hammering as I go. You're gonna want the two pieces of metal as close together as you can. Finished up tacking it. Judge my welds, whatever. It works, it's on there. Got it there. Ground this down a bit, but it's attached. The weld doesn't seal it. That's the next step. I test fit the wheel. Ended up cutting a little more from here. So cut that, re-welded it, wiped it off, cleaned it pretty good, and now I'm gonna seal it. I've been using this stuff. Works pretty good, dries pretty quick. And yeah, pretty much just lay it on. I spray it with my finger, and then for these parts, I just get a nail and put on the nail and use the nail to spread it around. Got it sealed with the rubber sealant. Now you can't see my shitty welds. Make sure, get all the edges. I got the front of this and kind of the same on the back, so everything's sealed. Doesn't look good, but as long as it's sealed and is doing its job, then it's all that matters. Plus, I'm gonna go over it with black primer to get the rest of the bare metal under. We'll prime the underside and the top side, so I'll start taping to get that. Next step, gonna mount the fender liner, I'd recommend keeping it. I want to keep it. So what I need to do is trim this lip down to about 1/2 inch, 3/8, something like that. And I'm also gonna drill a hole here where the two pieces of metal are sandwiched together for another mounting point. All right, so once you have this tab trimmed so the flare can go on, and there's, I don't know, 1/8 to 1/4 inch space between the edge of this and the back of the flare, and you have the tabs trimmed off of your flare, so where this lip lands on the inside flare surface is flat and even. You can start trimming the fender liner. I kind of start from the left and cut notches so it can stretch up and match with this. You might have to, I have had to trim some off the edge. You can see this one overhangs a little bit, so I'm just trimming that so they match up. And then I'm gonna use, let's see, where is it? This edge trim stuff from the auto parts, and pretty much this sandwiches both of the tab here and the fender liner together. It's kind of a pain. I suggest just going from the left or from the back to the front, and cutting the slots for the fender liner as you need, because it needs to stretch up, but it'll get it in. Press it on real good. On the edges, like some of the fender liner here isn't long enough, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. I put a piece of it here to hold that, and then I have a zip tie here, that hole to tuck the fender liner up. Depending on how you cut it, how much you cut, you might have to get creative with how you're holding the fender liner in and whatnot, but this guy, the idea, if you trimmed it right, that's why I recommend some test fitting of the flare, so that the flare rests against this and has support. All right, so now on to trimming the flare. I taped out a little line of what I want to cut, test fit it, see what you need to cut, or just cut a lot. I don't know. I'd rather keep more flare, or as much flare as I can, on it. And then I'm also going to sand out the 3 tabs we're not using. I actually, on the other one, I just used some clippers, cut them off, and then sanded it flat. That doesn't have to look pretty. And then I don't know, this thing, the inner thing separated for me, so I'm going to Gorilla Glue that back together. The seal at the top of my flare is pretty good, so I'm not going to mess with it. My front flare is disintegrated, so I used, on my front flares, some like 1/4 inch double-sided 3M tape, and that worked great for that. Flares back on, popped in, got the clips all in. If you need to trim more of the tab in, you'll have little gaps here, so trim it back until it's firm against the flare, but it isn't pushing the flare and the mounting points out. And you can see it's trimmed in there. Up here it looks all nice, and it's sealed all the way around, and you got room for your wheels and tires, and hopefully she won't rust. She's ready to rip. Cheers.